The earth beneath Silas Mercer's boots had cracked like old leather, parched and forgotten. He stood at the edge of his failing ranch, watching the sun sink behind distant mountains. No rain for months. No life stirring in the soil. Nothing but dust and memory. Silas pulled a worn photograph from his shirt pocket, Margaret, smiling up at him from another lifetime. Her eyes still bright despite the photo's fading edges. 5 years gone now, taken by the same fever that had left her womb-bearing years before. He tucked the picture away and squinted at the horizon where his property stretched for acres, all of it as empty as the house at his back. A coyote called in the distance. Silas turned toward home, his shadow long and solitary against the dying light. The ranch house stood like a sentinel against the elements, weathered boards, a sagging porch, windows that had seen better days. Inside wasn't much better. Silas moved through rooms that felt too large for one man. Dinner was beans and coffee, eaten standing at the kitchen counter while staring at Margaret's china cabinet, untouched since her passing. Morning came with its familiar routine. Silas fed the few animals he had left, 3 horses, a dozen cattle, chickens that barely laid enough eggs to justify their feed. He mended fences that didn't need mending just to keep his hands busy. The well was running low again. Everything was running low. Neighbors were scarce in this part of the country. The nearest, Old Man Harkins, lived 7 miles east and hadn't spoken more than 10 words to Silas in as many years. The town of Meridian lay 20 miles south, a place Silas visited only when necessity demanded it. That evening, as dust settled across the yard, Silas sat in Margaret's rocking chair on the porch. The emptiness pressed in around him like a physical thing. No children's laughter had ever filled these rooms. No small feet had ever raced across these floors. Just silence and the persistent tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting away the hours of a life half-lived. 2 days later, Silas loaded his truck with the few calves he could spare and headed to Meridian. The livestock auction would bring enough to cover his property taxes, maybe with a little left over for supplies. The drive was long and dusty, giving him too much time with his thoughts. Meridian hadn't changed, a collection of faded storefronts, a diner, the bank, and Holcomb's general store. Silas parked near the auction house and unloaded his calves, nodding silently to the other ranchers who barely acknowledged him in return. While waiting for his lot number, Silas wandered to the back of the auction house where men gathered in small clusters, voices low. He wasn't one for gossip, but the mention of the Ramirez family caught his attention. They'd worked the Rodriguez orchard for years. Heard they're selling everything, a man in a worn Stetson said. Even putting the girl up for labor contract. 15 years old, another added. Shame, but times being what they are. Silas moved away, uncomfortable with the conversation, but the words followed him. Later, as he collected his money, less than he'd hoped for, the auction manager handed him an envelope along with his payment. Someone asked me to give you this, the man said, already turning away. Back in his truck, Silas opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address and a date tomorrow evening. At the bottom, scrawled in hurried handwriting, labor contract auction. Ramirez girl. Thought you might be interested. H. Had to be Harkins. The old man knew about Margaret, about their inability to have children. Knew how the emptiness had hollowed Silas out year by year. Silas crumpled the paper, then smoothed it out again. The idea was absurd. Buying a girl's labor contract? It wasn't slavery, not technically, but it wasn't right either. He tossed the paper onto the passenger seat and started the truck. All the way home, the paper sat there like an accusation. By the time Silas pulled up to his ranch, night had fallen, and he'd made up his mind to forget the whole thing. But sleep wouldn't come. Silas lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the Ramirez family, about desperation so deep you'd sell your child's labor, about a 15-year-old girl with nowhere to go. Morning brought no clarity. Silas went about his chores mechanically, his mind elsewhere. By afternoon, he found himself standing in front of Margaret's closet, running his fingers over dresses she'd never wear again. "What would you do, Maggie?" he whispered to the empty room. The address led Silas to a small house on the outskirts of Meridian. Cars and trucks lined the dirt driveway. Men stood in small groups, smoking and talking quietly. Silas parked at the end of the line and sat for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. He could still drive away. Instead, he got out and walked toward the house, hat in hand. Inside, the front room had been cleared of furniture except for a few chairs. About 15 men stood around, most of them ranchers or farmers Silas recognized by sight if not by name. At the far end of the room stood a small family, a haggard-looking man with stooped shoulders, a thin woman with eyes fixed on the floor, and between them, a girl. Marisol Ramirez stood straight despite the circumstances. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from her face, her dress clean but worn thin. She looked younger than 15, small for her age, with hands that betrayed a lifetime of work, already calloused, strong, capable. But it was her eyes that caught Silas's attention. They weren't downcast like her mother's. They scanned the room, taking in each face, assessing, wary. When her gaze met his, Silas looked away first. A man in a suit, Rodriguez, the orchard owner, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, let's get started. The contract is for 3 years of labor. Room and board provided by the employer. $50 monthly to be paid to the family. The girl is strong, works hard, no complaints." He spoke as if describing livestock. Silas felt his stomach turn. "Starting bid is $500 for the contract." "Do I hear 500? Hands went up. The bidding moved quickly. 600. 700. Silas stood silent, watching the girl's face remain impassive as men bid on her future. When the price reached $900, the room grew quiet. Only 2 bidders remained, a heavy-set man Silas didn't recognize in Harkins, the old neighbor who'd sent him the note. $950, the heavy-set man said, a smile playing at his lips that made Silas's skin crawl. Harkins hesitated, then shook his head. $950 going once. Rodriguez began. 1,000, Silas heard himself say. The room turned to look at him. The heavy-set man scowled. 1,100. 12, Silas countered, his heart pounding. 1,250. Silas met the girl's eyes again. Something passed between them, not hope, exactly, but recognition. 1,500, Silas said, his voice steadier than he felt. The heavy-set man swore under his breath, then turned and pushed his way out of the room. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. 1,500 going once, twice, sold to Silas Mercer. Afterward, there were papers to sign, money to exchange. The girl's father wouldn't look at Silas or his daughter. Her mother embraced Marisol briefly, whispering something in her ear before Rodriguez pulled them apart. "She can get her things," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward a small bag in the corner. The bag held everything Marisol owned, a change of clothes, a hairbrush, a small book, and a wooden box the size of Silas's palm. She clutched it to her chest as they walked to his truck. The drive back to the ranch was silent. Silas gripped the wheel, wondering what madness had possessed him. The girl stared out the window, her profile sharp against the gathering darkness. "I'm not going to hurt you," Silas finally said, the words falling awkward between them. Marisol didn't respond, just continued looking out at the passing landscape. "There's a room. Upstairs. It was going to be." He stopped himself. "It's yours now." They reached the ranch after nightfall. Silas showed her to the room, small, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that faced east. He'd aired it out that morning, put fresh sheets on the bed, cleared away the boxes that had accumulated over the years. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said. "Kitchen's downstairs. Help yourself to whatever you need." Marisol set her bag on the bed, still clutching the wooden box. "Thank you," she said, the first words she'd spoken to him. Her voice was soft but clear. Silas nodded awkwardly. "We'll figure out everything else tomorrow." He closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the silence. What had he done? Dawn found Silas already in the barn, mucking stalls with more force than necessary. He barely slept, his mind racing with doubts and second thoughts. When he returned to the house, he found Marisol in the kitchen, frying eggs. "You don't have to cook," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I know how to cook," she replied, sliding eggs onto 2 plates. "I can clean too. And garden. I'm strong." She said it like she was trying to convince him he hadn't wasted his money. "That's not why." Silas began, then stopped. Why had he brought her here? He wasn't entirely sure himself. They ate in silence. Afterward, Silas showed her around the property, the barn, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that had gone mostly to weeds since Margaret died. Marisol took it all in with those watchful eyes. "What do you want me to do first?" she asked when the tour was done. Silas rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't. Just settle in for now. Rest." Marisol looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "I don't need rest. I can work." So Silas set her to weeding the garden, more to give her something to do than because it needed doing. He watched from the barn as she attacked the task with quiet determination, her small hands pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. Days passed. Marisol fell into the rhythm of the ranch, rising before Silas most mornings, preparing meals, cleaning the house that hadn't seen a woman's touch in years. She worked without complaint, spoke only when spoken to. At night, she disappeared into her room, the door closing firmly behind her. Silas found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, not in a way that would make Margaret ashamed, but with a growing curiosity. Who was this girl? What went on behind those careful eyes? One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Silas found Marisol sitting on the porch steps, staring at the sunset. The wooden box sat open in her lap. Inside were colored pencils and a small pad of paper. "You draw?" Silas asked, keeping his distance. Marisol started to close the box, then hesitated. "Sometimes. When I can. May I see?" She handed him the pad reluctantly. Silas flipped through pages of landscapes, mountains, trees, a stream he recognized as the one that ran along the eastern edge of his property. The drawings were simple but showed real talent, capturing light and shadow with surprising skill. "These are good," he said, handing the pad back. "Real good. My mother taught me," Marisol said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Before." She didn't finish the sentence. "Before things got hard," Silas guessed. Marisol nodded, looking down at her drawings. "The drought. Then my father's accident. His back." She trailed off again. "Is that why they sold your contract?" "We owed money to Mr. Rodriguez. For rent, for food." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "My brothers are too young to work. I was the only one who could help." Silas sat down on the steps, leaving space between them. "I'm sorry. Why did you buy me?" Marisol asked suddenly, turning to face him. "The other men, I know what they wanted. But you?" Silas looked out at the darkening land. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. This place is too empty." It was the most honest answer he could give. The next day, Silas drove to town and returned with a proper sketchbook and a set of watercolors. He left them on Marisol's bed without a note. That evening, she thanked him with a small smile that transformed her face, making her look her age for the first time since he'd met her. Summer heat settled over the ranch. Silas and Marisol fell into a routine, working side by side in the mornings, taking shelter from the afternoon sun, then returning to chores as evening cooled the air. They spoke more, though conversations remained brief. Silas learned that Marisol had 3 younger brothers, that she'd been the one to care for them after her father's injury, that she'd only completed school through the 6th grade. One afternoon, while Marisol was hanging laundry, Silas found himself in the barn, pulling down an old box from the rafters. Inside were Margaret's letters, dozens of them, written during their courtship and early marriage. He hadn't looked at them since her death. He was still sitting there, surrounded by unfolded papers, when Marisol found him hours later. "Mr. Mercer?" she called from the barn door. "Dinner's ready." Silas looked up, disoriented. "I'll be along." But Marisol had already seen the letters. "Are those from Mrs. Mercer?" Silas nodded, gathering the papers. "Just old memories." That night, after dinner, Silas found himself telling Marisol about Margaret, how they'd met at a county fair, how she loved to garden, how they'd tried for years to have children before learning they couldn't. "The room you're in," Silas said quietly, "that was going to be for our child." Marisol was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "Not your burden to carry," Silas replied. The next morning, Silas found a drawing slipped under his door, a sketch of the ranch house with morning light spilling across the porch. In the corner, Marisol had written simply, "Thank you." Something shifted between them after that night. Marisol began to speak more freely, asking questions about the ranch, about Margaret. Silas found himself smiling more, the weight on his shoulders lightening just a fraction. He showed Marisol how to ride the gentlest of his horses, taught her to mend fences, let her help with the cattle. In turn, she brought life back to Margaret's garden, coaxed flowers to bloom where only weeds had grown. She filled the house with small touches, wildflowers in jars, curtains washed and rehung, windows left open to catch the breeze. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching lightning flicker in distant clouds, Marisol asked, "Will it ever rain again?" "It always does," Silas answered. "Eventually." "My father used to say that too," she said, before he stopped believing it. Silas looked at her profile in the fading light. "Do you miss them?" "Your family?" Marisol nodded. "Every day. But..." She hesitated. "I'm not afraid here." The implication hung in the air between them. Silas didn't press for details. That night, rain finally came, not the downpour they needed, but a gentle shower that lasted till morning. Silas found Marisol already outside at dawn, face turned up to the dripping sky, smiling. 3 months after Marisol's arrival, Silas was repairing the chicken coop when he heard a vehicle approaching. He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, and walked around to the front of the house. A county sheriff's car sat in his driveway, dust settling around its tires. Deputy Collins, a man Silas knew vaguely from town, stood beside it. Next to him was a woman in a suit Silas didn't recognize. "Silas," Collins nodded. "This is Ms. Winters from Child Protective Services." Silas felt his stomach drop. "What can I do for you?" "We need to speak with Marisol Ramirez," the woman said, her voice clipped and professional. "We've received a report about her situation here." "She's in the garden," Silas said, pointing around the side of the house. "What's this about?" Collins shifted uncomfortably. "There's been some concern about the nature of her employment here." Silas's face hardened. "If you're implying—" "We're not implying anything," Ms. Winters cut in. "We're investigating the welfare of a minor. Labor contracts for children under 16 are being reviewed by the state." Marisol appeared around the corner of the house, dirt on her hands, wariness returning to her eyes at the sight of the visitors. "Marisol," Ms. Winters said, stepping forward. "I'm from Child Protective Services. I'd like to ask you some questions. Privately." Marisol looked at Silas, who nodded slightly. "It's all right," he said. "You can talk to her." Ms. Winters led Marisol to the porch while Collins remained with Silas by the car. "Who reported this?" Silas asked quietly. Collins sighed. "Anonymous call. But word gets around. You buying a contract for a young girl. People talk." "It wasn't like that," Silas said, his jaw tight. "You know me, Collins." "I do," the deputy agreed. "But Ms. Winters doesn't. And there are laws." On the porch, Marisol sat stiffly while Ms. Winters took notes. Silas couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see Marisol's face closed off, careful, the way it had been when she first arrived. After what seemed like hours, Ms. Winters returned to the car, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Mercer, I need to speak with you now." Silas followed her to the far side of the driveway, out of earshot of both Collins and Marisol. "Marisol says you've treated her well," Ms. Winters began. "That you've given her a room of her own, that you've never been inappropriate with her." "Of course I haven't," Silas said, anger rising in his throat. "Nevertheless, the situation is problematic. Labor contracts for minors are being phased out. And even if they weren't, a single man housing a teenage girl raises concerns." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we'll need to place her elsewhere. A proper foster home, or possibly return her to her family if conditions there have improved." Silas felt like he'd been punched. "You can't just take her." "Actually, Mr. Mercer, I can. The contract you signed has no legal standing if it violates child welfare laws." Silas looked over at Marisol, who was watching them intently from the porch steps. "Let me talk to her," he said. "Please." Ms. Winters hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Silas walked slowly to the porch, his mind racing. Marisol stood as he approached. "They want to take you away," he said without preamble. Marisol's eyes widened. "Where?" "Foster home, maybe. Or back to your family." "I don't want to go," she said, her voice small but firm. "I want to stay here." Silas sat heavily on the steps. "I don't think we have a choice, Marisol." "There's always a choice," she said, sitting beside him. "You chose to bring me here. I chose to stay, even when I could have run." Silas looked at her in surprise. "You thought about running?" "The first week," she admitted. "But then I saw how you lived. How lonely it was. I understood why you brought me here." "Why did I bring you here?" Silas asked, genuinely wanting to know her answer. "Because we're the same," Marisol said simply. "We both lost something. We're both trying to find it again." Silas felt something catch in his throat. He stood abruptly and walked back to Ms. Winters, his decision made. "I want to apply to be her foster parent," he said. "Officially. Whatever paperwork you need, whatever hoops I need to jump through." Ms. Winters looked skeptical. "Mr. Mercer, it's not that simple." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Silas replied. "But I'm asking you to give us a chance. Come inside. Look around. See how she lives here. Then decide." After a long moment, Ms. Winters nodded. "I'll look. But I make no promises." The inspection was thorough. Ms. Winters examined Marisol's room, the kitchen, the bathroom. She asked more questions about schooling. Silas admitted he hadn't considered it yet. About social interaction, limited, given their isolation. About future plans. "I could go back to school," Marisol offered. "In town. Mr. Mercer could drive me." "Every day?" Ms. Winters asked dubiously. "If that's what it takes," Silas said. As the afternoon wore on, Ms. Winters' rigid posture gradually softened. She watched as Marisol showed her the garden, the drawings she'd made, the horse she'd learned to ride. She observed the easy way Marisol moved through the house, the absence of fear in her interactions with Silas. Finally, as the sun began to set, Ms. Winters closed her notebook. "I'll need to file a report," she said. "And you'll need to begin formal foster parent applications, Mr. Mercer. There will be background checks, home studies, interviews." "Does that mean I can stay?" Marisol asked, hope creeping into her voice. "For now," Ms. Winters said cautiously. "Provisionally. We'll reassess in 30 days." After the visitors left, Silas and Marisol stood in the driveway watching dust settle in their wake. "Did you mean it?" Marisol asked. "About the school and everything?" "Every word," Silas said. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, Margaret's letters spread before him, reading words he'd memorized years ago. In one, she'd written about the children they hoped to have, how she'd teach them to garden, how Silas would teach them to ride. "We'll make this place a home for them," she'd written. "A place where they can grow strong and true." A sound made him look up. Marisol stood in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking younger than her 15 years. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I saw the light." Silas gestured to the chair across from him. "Neither could I." Marisol sat, glancing at the letters. "Were you reading about her again?" Silas nodded. "She would have liked you," he said. "Margaret. She would have seen what I didn't at first." "What's that?" "That sometimes family isn't what you expect it to be. Sometimes it finds you when you've stopped looking." Marisol smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "My mother used to say something like that. That God puts people in your path for a reason." "Smart woman, your mother." "Yes," Marisol agreed. "She told me to be brave when they took me away, that I might find something unexpected." She looked down at her hands. I think she was right. The next morning, they began work on a proper bedroom for Marisol. The room she'd been using was small, meant for a child. Together, they cleared out Margaret's sewing room, a larger space with windows on 2 sides. "We'll paint it whatever color you want," Silas said as they moved furniture. "Yellow," Marisol decided. "Like sunshine." They drove to town for paint and supplies. While there, Silas stopped at the school to inquire about enrollment. The principal was skeptical but agreed to place Marisol in classes appropriate to her education level once the proper paperwork was filed. On the drive home, Marisol was quiet, watching the landscape roll by. "Second thoughts?" Silas asked. She shook her head. "No. Just thinking about my brothers. Wondering if they're okay." "Silas,